Mando, Boba Fett, Obi-Wan, Andor, Ahsoka, Acolyte, Skeleton Crew. Which one do you think would have made a better animated show?
This might be a hot take. Let's start with a hot take.
Maybe this is also going to be a controversial take, but for me...
As usual, you've swayed me to your side of thinking by the end of the pod.
Welcome, everyone, to Krypton to Alderaan. I'm Joey, your Star Wars lover, and with me is Royce Goodlooks, your Star Wars song guy.
Hello, Joey. Hello, podcast. Hello, podcast.
Hello, and we're the podcast that analyzes nerdy pop culture, but it's mostly Star Wars. And this episode, we're taking a way back machine approach, and we're going to talk about some animated Star Wars and some live action Star Wars in a general sense, which kind of we prefer, which pulls at our heartstrings a little bit more, etc. But first, if you're new here, or you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Hey, if you're not sure about us, wait until the end. There's little cards that pop up on the screen that takes you to other videos that we've made, and they're all great, and you'll see other people that think they're great. So if you need to wait to commit, that's fine. I think that's enough of that. Let's punch it. Do we do the scream?
Ah!
So I'm going to kick this off in the least generous way possible. Let's do this. Let's do this. Okay. Animated Star Wars, what we have Clone Wars, Rebels, Resistance, The Bad Batch, Visions 1 and 2, Tales of the Jedi, Tales of the Empire, and Young Jedi Adventures. Live action stuff, what we have is The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Andor, Ahsoka, The Acolyte, Skeleton Crew. So by pure numbers, and I know you love numbers, Royce, we have a ton more animated Star Wars than live action Star Wars. And I think part of the conversation here today, we probably one or both of us would have said at some point, we need more animated Star Wars, right? Like that'll be the clickbait title.
That's the title.
But we have a ton more animated Star Wars than live action Star Wars. And I'm still like foaming at the mouth. I'm rabid for more. So what's your favorite animated Star Wars show?
Yeah, good question. I've this might be a hot take. Let's start with the hot takes. Favorite might not be like the perfect terminology for it, but I'm really excited by Tales. I like that we get arcs of like three episodes around like one character, right? Sort of thing, or one sort of side of a story. This might go against what my usual opinions are on the pod of like, I want, the dense story, the entire season, 1 hour long episodes, 22 episodes minimum. But I like that. I like that animated series that we get to explore things we don't normally get to explore, but we get kind of a little chunk there, 3 episodes with the same character, and then 3 episodes with another character that's like the opposite side of that coin. And those 2 Tales seasons, I think, are pretty fun. And maybe that's a little bit of a recency bias thing, as you like to often bring up. And I love The Bad Batch, 3 seasons of that. I love Rebels, 4 seasons there. I was rewatching some Rebels this past month and still holds up. Yeah, I would start there that Tales, I think, is the most exciting for me right now. Am I derailing the episode?
No, that's great. Going into my next question, what's your favorite live action Star Wars show?
Oh, it's got to be Mando, right?
Mando
or Ando, one of those two. Yeah. But the Mandalorians, I just think they're neat. I like spending time learning about the Mandalorian culture, and Din is kind of like the first love of live action Star Wars TV.
That's true.
So I think a lot of people maybe look at Ahsoka maybe that way with animation, So many people connect deeply with her, and I connect deeply with Din. Now, maybe not on a personal level, but just watching him, I like that character. And Andor's cool, and I'm sure season 2 will be great. I'd put Mando number 1 for live action.
All right. Third question. How much more do you like Tales of the Jedi, Tales of the Empire than Mandalorian, whichever your favorite season is?
Listeners, watchers, Joey's putting me on the spot right now. I've not been prefaced with any of these, and nor have I thought deeply about what I'm about to say, if I've thought about it at all. Man, yeah, like if I had to get rid of one of them, right? Which would you rather get rid of, right?
Sure.
Yeah, I guess I would probably lean towards Mando because that just feels a little bit more fleshed out. I mean, it's not a total fair comparison there. Tales, like I said, is kind of like, it's the filling in the gaps. You're filling in the somehow, and I like that.
So you would keep Mando or get rid of Mando?
I think I'd keep, in this battle, I'd keep 3 seasons of Mandalorian rather than 2 6-episode seasons of Tales.
Oh, all 3. That's interesting. Okay. That's a choice. This will fuel the rest of the conversation because I just think that animated Star Wars, for me, blows away any of the live action competition. There's just so much more of it. And also, I just connect with it so much more. I find the stories so much more emotionally thought out and emotionally, there's emotional hooks. I just love, obviously, I love animated Star Wars. And I think my favorite animated Star Wars has to be The Bad Batch. I've given it enough time. Like we always say, like I always say, like recency bias obviously is a thing. When I was writing down these questions to ask you, knowing that I wasn't going to give you these questions ahead of time, I was coming up with my answers, and it's just so, there's just such a big gap for me between any live action Star Wars and The Bad Batch.
Well, wait, so you, Bad Batch favorite animation. What's the favorite live action?
That's hard for me. I think there's more recency bias. I'm more caught up in recency bias with the live action stuff than with the animated stuff. And I think it's because the animated stuff always, not always, but when it like hits me in the feels, it really hits me in the feels. And maybe Mando season 1 did that for me somewhat. Obi-Wan 100% did that. I know like not a lot of people, I don't think a lot of people like Obi-Wan for some reason, but it hit in the feels a lot.
Dude, goodbye, Darth. Are you kidding me? Oh.
Yeah. That whole scene, like the fight and then, you know, you didn't kill Anakin, I did. That whole thing is incredibly powerful and incredibly emotional. I think that's just so good. Like that show deserves so much more praise than it gets. I hold a lot of the live action Star Wars on the same playing field, I think. Like Andor is probably technically the best, but it's the least Star Wars. It's the least Star Wars show to me. And we talk a lot here about like what makes Star Wars special to us, what drew us in with Star Wars, what made us OG fans of Star Wars. And none of that is Andor. I love Andor. It's a political thriller. It's great. But
no broom boys.
It's like there's a lot of conversations with some of the live action shows about like what is or is not George Lucas's vision for Star Wars. And Andor, although great, is the farthest away from any of that for me. So it's got a little asterisk next to its name. Yeah. I don't know. It's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal show.
Right.
The writing, like the acting is great. The story is great. And the writing, every like main character gets an incredible speech that has us all like clenching our fists, right? It's so good. But the Bad Batch is on a whole other level, man. It's just something else that's very special. We got so much more of those characters, right? Like we got 3 seasons of them. The first season maybe wasn't super strong, but it really found its footing. And like the end makes it all worth it. We know how Andor ends, so it will like make the journey worth it. But in terms of my preference of Star Wars show.
I missed it though. Are you calling Andor your favorite though? And then we're going to kill that and we're going to keep Bad Batch?
Yeah. How should we
drop the hot
this?
Takes already?
Should we do like marry, kill something else for these Star Wars shows? Yeah, you know, I think that I went down this rabbit hole of Andor because I'm afraid to say that maybe my favorite live action Star Wars show is The Acolyte, because it touched a lot on what I love about Star Wars, and it did new stuff. It took us to new places.
Yeah, okay.
My point is that I would keep Bad Batch over any of the live action shows. I would keep the animated shows over any of the live action shows. Yeah.
Wow. Over any. I was thinking about, like, even before we were talking today, Mando, once we see Baby Yoda at the end of the first episode, it's like, what? Like that is one of those moments. That's Luke on the edge of the cliff at the end of Force Awakens. You know, it's one of those moments where you're like, mind blown here. I have to see the next thing. And that's hard to top for me. And I think that's like Star Wars has had a lot of hits and misses in the last couple of years. And that is an extreme hit, that moment there. And that cannot be undone for me. And there's lots of stuff I love in the Bad Batch. And then we can pit up different scenes and different episodes against each other. But that's interesting. Bad Batch over anything, live action. Yeah, shots fired. And everybody that is listening and watching, we need to hear your answers here. What's your favorite live action? What's your favorite animated? And which one would you do without? Right. Or that you can't live without?
Yeah.
We'd love to know.
No, I think this is yeah, it's kind of as maybe ungenerous as we're being. This is a very fun conversation to have at this time when we're on the like precipice of having Andor season 2, which is obviously going to blow us all out of the water. I'm not discrediting any of the live action stuff. We also wouldn't have the Bad Batch without live action Star Wars, right? Without like the original or without the prequel trilogy, we wouldn't have any of that stuff. So, but I do think the Bad Batch and the Clone Wars makes the prequel trilogy better for me.
Is that the pivot point though, Joey? That the animated shows are the filling in the gaps, the filling in the somehow. Right. Do they do that better than live action? Like you say, there's all these heartfelt moments, all the, found family storytelling that Bad Batch does, that Rebels does. But is the X factor that they make the other properties better? Whereas you have something like The Acolyte, which is a very bold endeavor that Star Wars took on, but did that make the prequels better? Did that make the originals better? Did that help flesh something else out? It seemed like that really made it harder for people to like tie those things together. And even the sequels, same thing. It's like, oh, well, that didn't really maybe tie in until we got animated shows that helped then connect.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it for me. And I don't know what a lot of the reasoning is there. It's almost like they like leave these gaps to be filled in by animated shows. The Bad Batch was touching on Palpatine, how Palpatine returned. And that's how many years after the rise of Skywalker, right? So they give the animated shows the opportunity to fill in these gaps, which
they
is
have
also
more of a purpose.
Right. It's very purposeful. And through that purpose, it's a very emotional journey most of the time. But I think it's also a pretty dangerous game for Star Wars to play because even now there is a stigma against animation, right? How long did it take you to start watching animated Star Wars?
Yeah. But yeah, eventually I came in and I don't regret it. And I've been missing out and I'll wave the animation flag forever. But everybody has their own kind of journey of when they finally understand that.
Yeah. I think it's also a bit of like, there's plenty of people out there who still think animation is for kids. And you can't watch the Clone Wars or the Bad Batch and continue, or Visions, and continue to think that way, because the death count in the Clone Wars is probably astronomical, like on-screen death count. And then the Bad Batch is super heavy family, like just to show about building this family. And especially at the end, it's very intense. People be getting their hands cut off and all kinds of crazy stuff. I think also, as we've said before, another part that puts this up higher on the shelf is that there's so much more risk you can take in animation. I think like it's hard to take risks in live action. And it's part of why maybe people didn't think the Acolyte worked so well, because there were a lot of risks. But in animation, you have a much more niche group that's watching, and you are able to do a lot more, and there's a lot more forgiveness when stuff happens because it's animated. So we're not connecting with another human being and their actions and the way they move and all kinds of stuff, because there is a disconnect. There's like uncanny valley isn't the right word, but it's something there where we forgive a lot more in animation because we're not seeing ourselves in this other character.
Well, you can't blame an actor that you're like, I don't like the way Ahsoka stands. It's like nobody ever complains. I don't like the way I guess maybe you can complain about the animation style.
Sure.
But I don't often hear people complain about like the blocking of the animation,
right. Yeah, it's much more forgivable. I think this is all speculation, and this is just the way this is all just how my brain works. I know that I forgive a lot more in animation than I do in live action anything. And I think that's it. I think it's just because, there's a disconnect there. You're not going to be able to fully connect with the animated character on the other side of the screen as much as you do with another living human being on the other side of the screen. So I think, that's another part of this all, which makes it even more important in my mind, because I did love these shows so much and would put them ahead of live action, even if I'm not necessarily like making that specific connection with characters. And I think that makes it easier for them to be better, for them to for me to think that they are better, because I do forgive so much of those things.
Well, and there's more room for interpretation, I guess, to some degree, even though they animate the characters very detailed. So it's hard to say that it's not exactly equivalent, but it's still pretty darn good. And there's times where just the voice acting alone, I think is powerful. We talked about the scene with Emery and Echo, and literally Emery just says, Echo? And the way the line is delivered is incredible. You know, so there's a lot of those,
so good.
Like the voice acting can draw you in, even just without seeing the visual, you know? On this visual train, though, can I throw a little loop in here?
Go for it.
I was thinking about like episodes in the Bad Batch, like where they're in that mine and they're like trying to, I forget what they're trying to do. They're trying to recover something from the mine, right? But there's a big gap and then Omega falls down the gap and then isn't there a river? Or I don't know if I'm conflating a couple episodes, but they're on this wild adventure in a cave and then they're in a river and they need to save each other at the end of the river. And I was just thinking, like, could they do that in live action? And then maybe all of the other like fantastic adventures they do in animation, that what compromise would they have to do in live action? And I think they've done a lot of crazy things in live action, but I'm thinking about rivers. I'm like, what rivers have we seen in live action? Like,
well, we've seen Camino. I guess that's an ocean.
But not recently, though, in live action. And
no,
I was thinking, like, there's the end of Mandalorian is at season 1. They're coming out of that, like, river on Navarro, and they're just, it's just a boat, you know, floating down. You know, it wasn't this fantastic scene of swimming and splashing through. And
I'm pretty sure that was a river of lava, so not a whole lot of splashing.
Sure. Okay, I guess.
Just IG.
Debunked why that scene wasn't more exciting.
Yeah.
But there's something there, though, of like what you're able to accomplish, like scenery-wise and also just action-wise in the setting, you know, that, I mean, we got a pod race in the Bad Batch. Like, I don't know how much energy would have to go into another live-action pod race, but potentially easier in the Bad Batch.
Talk about action. The spoiler alert for the Bad Batch, the episode where we see Tech die. That's a very action-oriented episode, and because in season 2 made me fall in love with that character. I think that happened in season 2. The show eventually taught me that I loved that character, and we went on a journey with that character in that scene where he and Omega are talking in that cave about how he's, just because he sees things differently or reacts differently doesn't mean he's not feeling things. And then we see him sacrifice himself for his brothers, and we spent so much time with them. I do not think any of the live action shows have emotionally impacted me as much as that one scene in the Bad Batch. How's that for a review? And there were so many moments like that in the Bad Batch, especially towards the end. Yes, Mando and Grogu are great together. I love them. It's an emotional I'm not like discrediting that at all. I know I'm saying it very flippantly right now. It's great. It's a very strong emotional connection. But looking through these things, aside from Obi-Wan and Vader's confrontation in Obi-Wan Kenobi, I do not recall any moment in any of these live action shows that has hit me as hard emotionally as moments in the animated shows.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, when you start breaking it down, there's so many like little micro moments, though. You want to bring back to Andor and all the stuff with Marva's brick, man, with Brasso just, like that.
That's one, yeah.
That's maybe not this heart swelling moment, but when I see that, when I just see that still image, like, that is the energy I need to be channeling right now. That feels really good to me, that particular scene. There's a release there that I love. They all grab you in different ways, but so the kind of heart swelling side, is that what you're more speaking towards?
That's me personally. That's what I go for in general. I want those like personal emotional connections. And yes, we do have that in Andor. The biggest of those connections in Andor is between B2 Emo and Marva. And when Marva dies and B2 Emo is super sad, like that's the moment that tears me up in that. And it's between, you know, the great thing about Andor is that moment is between a droid and a human, and it makes me feel things. For me, there's a lot more emotional connections to the animated stuff than there is to the live action stuff. So animation wins.
Is it just these compartmentalized moments that are written and directed really well, though, or you know, arranged really well? Or is it part of just like the time you've spent in the world and the consistency of the kind of time we've spent in the world? Because one thing for me is like Bad Batch, it's 16 episodes, but it's 16 like weeks. So like time-wise, it still winds up being like the same amount of minutes or hours as some of the eight episode live action series. But I think the like 16 bits means something to me, that you're like, you are able to grow a little bit more because you don't spend more time with them
right in
general, but it's drawn out a little bit more.
Yeah, it feels like we get to know everyone a lot better, I think.
Yeah, like I see you every day, even though I only spend 1 minute with you every day, sort of thing, you know?
Yeah, like you're saying, it's the same amount of time spent overall, like on average.
I've never complained about The Bad Batch being too short, though.
Right. So 16 episodes of The Bad Batch equals, let's just say, an 8-episode live action show in time.
In runtime, total runtime.
So in that runtime per capita, I get a lot more emotionally connected with the characters in the animated one than in the live action one.
Yeah. Skeleton Crew, though, I think probably did the best out of any in recent memory, though, live action, of like pulling me into Jod, pulling me into Neil, even Wim. Like they did a really good job. There was a lot of consistency there. We didn't jump around to a flashback with different characters, to a different planet with different characters. And we've said Skeleton Crew feels more similar to animation than any of the other live action series have so far. I might put Mando second place with that, because Mando kind of feels like an adventure of the week type of thing that would translate back to animation well, which I also think is an interesting concept of what we're saying, what might be difficult for animation to do if it had to be live action, but what would be cool, you know, vice versa, live action into animation, you know? What could we fill in the gaps with the Acolyte that didn't work for some people? Why don't we just get a High Republic animated series and we'll clean up that a little bit?
I'm glad you teed this up. My final question for you is, actually, I really like your question. So let's put a pin in that. And second to last question is, of these live action shows, Mando, Boba Fett. Oh, we haven't talked about Boba Fett at all, because that's one of the things we're not generous. Boba Fett. That's one of the things we're not generous about. Mando, Boba Fett, Obi-Wan, Andor, Ahsoka, Acolyte, Skeleton Crew. Which one do you think would have made a better animated show?
Ooh, better is interesting.
Like better than its like live action, better than the live action version.
Obi-Wan almost feels like that's a Tales of the Jedi sort of story, or I guess Empire. That kind of fits in between there. Like that maybe could have been interesting. Like, what if we got 3 episodes with Obi-Wan, 3 with Vader, and maybe they kind of cross over, and there's different lessons that Vader's learning, different lessons that Obi-Wan is learning. And maybe that could also, again, make Obi-Wan the series stronger, because that's kind of what that show was doing. You know, there was like the Inquisitor thing and the Obi-Wan Vader thing, and that was a mishmash. And Luke and Leia, you know, Luke and Leia, Tales could be cool. Tales of the Young Rebellion or something. I don't know. I don't know if I want that to be my answer, though. You mentioning Boba Fett, like the crime boss, like that could be really fun.
That's true. Could we make Boba Fett better? Could we redeem the Book of Boba Fett by making it an animated show?
I love that. That's another great, you want to be generous about these shows. I think like the different towns, you know, Freetown, right? On Tatooine, and the Tuscans, like there was a lot of cool stuff there that just got, you know, the flashbacks just didn't play nicely front to back. Although I love the story in the flashbacks, the real time was odd of like, who is Boba Fett? What's his motivation? He wanted to like, you know, be a good guy, but he's also a bad guy. I don't quite understand. Yeah. But that could be a fun week to week of like, what new, you know, situation is Boba Fett dealing with trying to like be the boss on Tatooine? That's a bias though that you brought him up, but
well, we don't have many shows to choose from. So.
That or the Acolyte High Republic thing. I think obviously we have the Young Jedi Adventures, and maybe that has some High Republic stuff going on as well, but something to maybe flesh out the Acolyte, because I don't want that. I don't want there to be Star Wars properties, animated or live action or novels or movies that were just like, well, we don't talk about that. Like, let's celebrate it for what it is, and if we can make it even better, that's awesome. Like, let's make Rise of Skywalker awesome, right?
Agreed.
I would like that if we could help the Acolyte, since so many people didn't seem to enjoy it. But what if we could smooth over the edges, right? And not just complaining about it. Here's how I would have done it. It's like, well, no, let's reframe what happened in another story. And I think that would be a beautiful addition to the world. So I'm skating around a couple. I can't give one, but all those would be cool. Dude, where are you landing with this?
Maybe this is also going to be a controversial take, but for me, Ahsoka. Ahsoka is important to me because she's an animated character, and Dave Filoni has animated Star Wars is what it is because of Dave Filoni for the most part. And so taking Ahsoka, and maybe a lot less people would have watched the show if it was animated, but having her sequel, having Ahsoka's future be told in an animated form coming after Rebels, and whatever's going to happen next, whether we get some Mortis God stuff or other Force deity type stuff, I think that all works so well. We've seen it work really well in animation, and there were a lot of like complaints about like the lingering moments in the show, and it wasn't fast paced enough and stuff like that, which does create those emotional ties for me into live action.
I like those slower moments.
I love those slower moments 100%. I think they're very important. But I think if I were to change one, or maybe just add to it in any way.
Yeah, we conflated those two questions a little bit. Yeah.
Ahsoka would be the one for me. There was a high chance that Skeleton Crew would be the answer, but like we've said, it is already very close to being one of those animated shows.
Right. How would that be better?
Right. So I think Ahsoka would be better from my perspective as an animated show because I have an emotional connection to her as an animated character, and all of the reasons I already stated. You can do so much more, and it can be so much more grand, and you don't have to rely on you have to rely on the animators, which are not always treated that well, but like you don't have to rely on the volume or any like real world stuff that causes pain points or like slow down or anything like that. You can just like go for it, which I think like season 2 of Ahsoka probably has to go for it. They're trapped on a world. There's Mortis God stuff. Like it's going to be, I think you're going to have to like really punch it. So I just think that would be better by being made animation. And I love The Acolyte just the way it is because it is live action. Because they took those risks with live action. I read all of the in-between High Republic stuff anyway. So all of those, like anything where it would be filled in, it's not necessarily at the same time as The Acolyte, but I have a lot of history with the High Republic. So
stay tuned for our next episode. Which series would be better as a book?
Yeah. Do you think anyone will listen to that?
So Joey, I love that. And I think, as usual, you've swayed me to your side of thinking by the end of the pod, because Ahsoka, she came from animation, so it would kind of make sense that it just continues from there, and I would love to see, Ahsoka and Ezra and Sabine and, all of the stuff that came from Clone Wars and Rebels just in the Bad Batch, style, right? Because Bad Batch looks epic. Yeah, the animation would look great with Ahsoka. And that's interesting because we took an animated thing and we brought it to live action, and some people had complaints about it. But again, like, celebrate it for what it is. It's the only Star Wars show, maybe not only, but it's one of the few that takes a minute before it smash cuts to something else. And that's something I appreciate about it. But I agree with you that if it was an animation, it would just be a complete continuation of the series rather than this kind of odd transition into live action. And if you didn't watch animation, you're missing a little bit, and the characters may or may not look the same, et cetera. So that is an interesting one. I'll give you that. If one had to be strictly taken from one realm and put in the other, I think I would agree with that one. More so than Boba Fett. We want to hear from all the listeners too. What would you do in this circumstance as well? What would you put into animation from live action? Vice versa. Leave your comments below.
Yeah, please let us know, because I think this is a really fun conversation, and I really obviously love the animation, so I'd be super curious to hear what everyone listening thinks. And also, I think we just have to say maybe one last time, as much as we've said this, we celebrate all of these shows, maybe besides the Book of Boba Fett.
I was just going to say, I think it's time for a rewatch and re-review.
Sure. I'll try. But mostly we celebrate all of these shows because we love Star Wars, and there's good stuff in them, and where we don't like them, we understand that other people find stuff to like in them, and everyone's coming at this from their own perspectives. So everyone's going to see a different thing in each of these things. So I came on here wanting to like pit these two mediums against each other, which was fun. But I want to make it clear that
well, it's fine. Like, animation is for you. that hits for
it's
you.
Mine.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's, like you said, all Star Wars is somebody's Star Wars, and you're waving your flags of where you're planting them today. And that's cool. Mm-hmm. That's the fun we're having today. I think people understand that you don't need to apologize. Yes, the Bad Batch.
It's so good. If anyone is listening this far and has not watched The Bad Batch, go watch the right now. Go watch The Bad Batch. That's all I got. Those are all the questions I have. And thank you for participating in this, Royce, with absolutely no context lead up, our normal brainstorming session, just straight into it.
I love it. I want to do more of these. You had some great questions, and even though if I prepared, maybe I would have said different things, but I'm loving this, and I'm hoping that we were able to successfully record another video. And let us know again if you're watching how you like the video versions of these podcasts. We'd love to hear your feedback if you have any, and if you've listened this far. We appreciate it. And so make sure to hit subscribe and tune in next time for more nerdy pop culture, but mostly Star Wars. Thanks for listening and watching to the show today. I've been Royce.
I've been Crosshair.
And we've been Krypton to
Alderaan.